am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interview Jennifer Briggs, President and CEO of the Indiana CPA Society. She is the fifth CEO in the organization's 103-year history and the first female in this role. Briggs joined the Society staff in 2002 as a special projects manager and subsequently served as marketing manager, marketing director, director of member services, vice president of member services, and senior vice president and chief operating officer. Prior to the Indiana CPA Society, she worked at KWK Management Group, serving as executive director for 5 statewide associations. She earned a degree in marketing from Marian University and an MBA with a focus on leadership at Butler University in 2015. She is a certified association executive and is a member of the Indiana Society of Association Executives, American Society of Association Executives, and the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. During this episode, Jennifer describes how her upbringing of being the daughter of a father in the Army helped her learn to adapt to change. She shares how learning how to communicate and advocate for herself and others has helped her achieve success in her career. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs. And today I am with Jennifer Briggs. And Jennifer, you want to give a brief introduction of who you are?
Sure. I am Jennifer Briggs. I am the CEO of the Indiana CPA Society, which is an association for CPAs. We have about 7,000 members in Indiana.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining today. And we like to dive right into just understanding who you are. So where did you come from? Where did you grow up? And what does your parents do?
Oh, good one. So I grew up everywhere. My dad was in the Army.
Oh, okay.
So we moved every 1 to 2 years. We moved a lot, even for Army.
What did he do in the Army?
He was in communications. So He did hosted radio programs for the Army network and worked in television also. We lived in Germany for my teen years. And so that was fun. And my mom stayed home and generally would watch kids in the house. So what I got from that generally was I like change. I like to move around, although I haven't, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And then from my mom, of course, always being around kids and babies. I've always loved babies.
So how did you end up in Indiana then?
So my dad was stationed at Fort Harrison in Indianapolis, and that's where he retired. The fort is no longer there. It's actually a residential development now, but it was still active when he retired there. And so I was at the end of high school, which was kind of an awkward time to move.
Right, I bet.
And we moved from Frankfurt, Germany, where I had access to all kinds of public transportation and went anywhere I wanted to and did what I wanted to suburb in Indianapolis. I didn't know how to drive.
Did you speak with German, or were you?
I did a little bit when I was there, but I've let it go.
Yeah.
And so what's funny is, so they moved here. I really did not want to be here. I was a grumpy teenager about it. And now they all left and I'm the only one.
That's funny. So what was it like growing up in Germany?
I thought it was magical. I loved it. I mean, I was 12 when we went there, and we lived for 2 years in near Ramstein Air Base, and we lived in a little village, and that was, a little bit scary at first. I was just the right age to not be too intimidated by the whole thing.
Right.
And then we moved after 2 years to Frankfurt, so a bigger city, and I lived there. But it's the kind of thing where you grow up there in the circumstances I did, going to a school with other military kids, and like we took a field trip to Anne Frank's house.
Right.
We were able to go to Vienna and see the Habsburg carriage that started World War I, with the, so it was just a lot of sense of history and opportunity to go places and do things in a way that honestly, then I didn't really understand that other people didn't do that, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely makes sense. Yeah.
And so I'd never been around people other than Army kids mostly. And so when we moved to Carmel, Indiana, and I met people who had gone to kindergarten together all the way through high school, I had no idea.
Right. So like you never thought about having a life where you didn't move around, that you've been used to moving around and never questioned it.
Yeah, it never occurred to me. I mean, it might have when I was a kid, but it just was so natural.
Uh-huh. So with, when I think about moving around, and even if you're all in Germany, but you're moving to different cities, so you're having to make new friends, did you have a process you went through to start new each time or to meet people? Like, was there something mentally that you did so that you had the confidence to do that?
Oh, wow. Interestingly enough, I was incredibly shy as a child. People don't always believe that because I'm so chatty now, but
Yeah.
I was very shy and, would tend to just start a new school and kind of listen for a while, and kind of see what was going on and slowly make friends. And again, it's interesting when you go to school with kids who also move a lot, they're all pretty good at it, if you know what I mean. So you kind of make friends fast, and then when somebody's leaving, it sounds bad, but don't make a big deal about it. See them later. And so that's another thing that I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and I do think that's quite a skill because, we lived in South Florida when my kids were younger. They were born there, but we moved back to Cincinnati when my oldest was 12. And that was part of the problem, is he would make friends every year and they'd leave. It was such a transient area, and he just, it was so hard for him to like find kids he liked. And then as soon as he did, they would move out, and just the disappointment was just hard.
Yes, I can see that. And again, I was fortunate to be with until high school, right? And then I'm with these people who've known each other their whole lives, and I'm trying to understand what that would be like, and trying to figure, I'm in a really big school, and I'm trying to figure out, your place. It was challenging. I didn't love that last year of high school.
Yeah. Well, and I would think moving your senior year would be.
I actually graduated early just to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's an interesting observation. So what do you think you did different because it was a culture you hadn't been a part of before? Like, you understood the Army culture and how to survive. Why was that different?
Everything felt so permanent or like set. And for example, when we moved to Carmel, my parents chose it because they had supposedly the best schools. We had never owned a home. We had always lived in government quarters, and they bought a house there and just really thought they were doing this solid thing.
Right.
And really, it just felt so strange to me. So I don't know why it was so hard to
Huh.
kind of navigate that particular. It's just like you were missing something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They all knew something you didn't know or had experienced things you hadn't experienced. And so I just found it really fascinating and challenging.
Yeah. Which is so, when you think about your parents, they wanted to give you some normalcy that you never had, but your normal, like, I talk about that with my kids and social media of how different we view it because we knew life before social media. So it's just something we added into our life, but we know what it is without it, where they were born into it. And so
Yeah.
that is their normal. Like their perspective we can never see. And it's kind of the same thing. Like your parents couldn't see your perspective. They were feeling like, whoa, I feel like we haven't given her something because she hasn't had that permanence. And you're like, no, I'm looking for the transient. Like that's what's normal.
Where is the subway? I don't understand what's happening. Yeah, it was very, very strange. And I think, like you were saying on social media, that's how I think about technology. And I have a
Mhm.
10-year-old, and I know people talk about it all the time, but I just truly believe his brain is wired differently. And the thing I always say, which is silly, but when you get like an iPhone update,
Mhm.
um, sometimes I have to try to like figure out what they've changed. And he seems to have zero trouble on the iPad. Just like it's intuitive how they would change this, and he goes right into it. And
Right.
I feel like that's part of him just always having it
Yeah.
versus the way we got used to it.
Yeah. So when you were younger, was there something you wanted to be when you grew up? Like when you imagined your life?
So I wanted to be a teacher, elementary school. Like I said, I was around kids all the time, and
Mhm.
I thought that I wanted to do that. I often talk about how I'm 49 years old. So certainly when I was growing up, the Cosby Show was on, and there were women attorneys, and Hillary Clinton was an attorney, and other profession doctors, but where I grew up, the way I grew up, the, we didn't know a lot of those people. If
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So for me, even though I feel like it makes me sound even older than I am, but it just didn't occur to me to do things other than maybe be a teacher. I knew I couldn't be a nurse because blood makes me pass out, but those kind of traditional roles
Right.
for women, I feel like we're still pretty strong with me, just because um, that's what I saw.
Mhm.
Also, with the military, it was mostly the men who were in the military. I knew some women, and so their spouses would travel with it. It's hard to have a job when you move every year or two. So a lot of them stayed home. And so I just thought I'd want to be a teacher and do that.
And so, along those lines, having seen a lot of women staying home, that wasn't of interest to you.
Um, oh, that's a that's a good one.
Yeah.
We're getting deep here.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't that I thought I have to have this career, because I really didn't know a lot about different careers, but it was more um, I had to take care of myself, if
Mhm.
that made sense.
Mhm.
My dad was not an officer. We had a nice life, but we were not well to do by any means. And so I just knew I had to take care of myself in some
Mhm.
way. And I guess deep down, I mean, I'm a romantic, if you will, and that I always wanted to find, the right person. And
Right.
so I waited a long time until
Yeah,
I
you
found
weren't
the
a
right.
rush to get married or have a family.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, especially probably with your background too, like you were very worldly for.
yeah. So worldly. I didn't think of it that way at the time. Um, I'm so grateful to have that experience of living in another country and visiting other countries as a young person, because I don't think of the US necessarily as the center of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not realize that until I got older, how different my perspective was, because I'd seen people living their lives, going to jobs, going to schools, who spoke a different language and lived in a different place. And I'm really grateful for that
I
experience.
totally get what you're saying. I had a global job, and that was one of my biggest epiphanies starting that job. Like, I remember it being 4th of July, and I turned to my friend and I'm like, this holiday feels different. Like, I've now been to all these countries and meeting accountants all over the world and seeing everybody like working just as hard, having the same dreams. I think a lot of times when you grow up in the US, and it's not something intentional, but you kind of think like, well, why wouldn't they live in the US?
Right.
Like, why would they live there?
Right.
And then when you have more experience, you're like, oh, this place is amazing. Of course they would live here. But
Absolutely.
you don't understand the perspective, and their lives aren't that different. I mean, there's different government situations and stuff like that. But, for the most part, people are people.
Yeah.
And you stop seeing differences in that way. And then you're like you said, like the history and just the way it is so different than what we're used to, right?
And you realize, again, maybe I didn't when I was young, but as you get older, you're like, gosh, this country, we're just babies,
Yes, exactly.
so young. And so, I mean, it makes you kind of more proud of all we do and influence that we have. But it also, you realize like none of our buildings are ever going to be as old as they are in England and France. And I was glad when we first moved to Germany and lived in that little village. Our landlord, we had an apartment there, and our landlord had a farm across the street. And so that family became close to us, and I got to really see people's lives in a way that I didn't expect. In fact, the grandma would come out every day and talk to me at the bus stop in German. I didn't know what she was saying, but we would hand gesture our way through a conversation.
That's awesome. So, okay. So now you're in Indiana. So did you go to Indiana University, or what ended up happening there?
Oh, so I went to IU Purdue in Indianapolis. So it's called IUPUI. And it was at the time almost entirely like a commuter school. Now people live on campus and that, but I went there and I worked full time.
And what did you go in for, to be a teacher, or?
That's what I started out. Mm-hmm. Yep. I ended up pretty early on realizing I didn't want to do that. I did some, not technically student teaching, but the same idea.
Right.
And I realized that I just really like children. I don't want to have to teach them anything. I just want to hang out. And I thought, well, this is not going to work for me. And then I didn't know. And so, like a lot of people, I'm so jealous of those people who, know in middle school what they want to do and what they want to be. I had absolutely no idea. And I was working and going to school. And I mean, I kept getting promoted at my job. And, that was kind of more interesting than, freshman, sophomore college classes.
So what were you doing?
I worked in insurance.
Okay.
I was a ridiculously young insurance agent. So I did, then I did underwriting, and I worked on high risk dwellings and mobile homes and motorcycles. And I still can't believe they let me do that, but I did. It was fun. But it was
How did you get that job? Was it just posted in school or?
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
I don't even remember. It might have been a friend told me about it or something, but
Right.
or I found it in the newspaper back when we used to do that sort
Look
of
at me.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I worked there for several years and just realized I didn't want to do that. And I kept having to travel more and work more. And I'm, 20 years old and it's hard to go to school and travel. And
Yeah.
so I saw an ad, I do remember this, in the newspaper for an association, an insurance association. It's the National Association of Mutual Insurance Companies, is headquartered in Indianapolis. And I was like, insurance, okay. So I went there and got a job in their communications department. And just honestly just got sucked in hook, line, and sinker with the whole association concept. And I have never done anything else. So maybe briefly, I thought I wanted to try something else. So I went to work in philanthropy. And that didn't even last a year. It's like, I didn't really enjoy just asking people for money all the time.
So what did you enjoy about association work?
The variety. It felt like if you could try it, you could do it, if that makes sense. They were very, there are a lot of different things you could do. You worked with people. I really enjoyed getting to know different people. And then honestly, it's just the very basic, we're better together concept is just near and dear to my heart. And I didn't know that I didn't know associations. I didn't know what they did. But once I learned about what they do and how everyone's working together to make each other better, it just struck a chord.
Yeah. So how did you, so walk through like how you got to the level you did, like what kind of experience?
Yeah. So this is what I always tell people because it's the truth. When I worked there, it happened to be a time when a lot of people were quitting. So I would just apply for whatever new job was open. And I moved around then. It was because it's a national association. We had about maybe 60 people in that office. And then a DC office. And so I just kept getting a different job. And then eventually I had a supervisor who, she was very influential, even though I've told her this, but we don't stay in touch now, but she left to go work for the University of Phoenix when it was brand new.
Yeah, I talked to them.
And we all thought like, okay, good luck. So, but she said to me one day, so I'm like, ooh, how old am I? Early 20s still, and she's maybe 30. But she's worked other places and is this professional. And she just said, you can do my job. She was the education director, I think. She said, you can do my job. Just tell them, our bosses, that you want to give it a try. They'll pay you less than they pay me. And they'll probably let you try it. And they did. So I'm not sure to this day, like, I don't think I would have sought out her job. I was still finishing school. But she just made it sound so easy. Like, just ask for it. Tell them you want this much money. It's less than I make, so they'll be happy, and do it. So I was fortunate to be in the right place at the right time.
But I love that advice. I mean, that's it, right? I mean, what's the worst thing that can happen? So they say no.
Right. I'm still sort of amazed, though, that I did it. Because that was not like me, but she just seemed so confident that it would work that I I tried it and it did.
Yeah.
And
And
that
then how
has,
did you feel taking on that job?
I just love learning new things. I love trying something new. So for me, any new job is very exciting. And so even at the society, though I've been here a long time, I think I've had 8 titles. So I just really loved learning about all of it. In fact, early in my career, that was probably a challenge I had, is that I would learn everything about my job and get really intense about it and work really hard. And then I would be done.
Right.
I would be done with that job.
Yeah.
So I stayed there for 5 years and then had various jobs. I had another job after the education director one where I had to travel a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not old enough to rent a car because you had to be 26 at the time. That was the rule.
Really?
So we'd have to finagle this whole system so I could rent a car when I went places. And again, at that point, I worked with a subsidiary of the association that did insurance arbitration.
Mm-hmm.
So where insurance companies would argue over who's going to pay. And I worked with lawyers who would go through these cases. Long story short, it was fascinating. And I still have no idea why they let me do it. But and yeah, I just I loved that job, but it was and then it just got time to go.
Right. Yeah. So how'd you end up at the society?
Oh, so then I went to the apartment association.
Oh, okay.
And I learned all about apartment, managers and owners and maintenance. And I did education and membership there. Again, so interesting. Most people don't know a lot about it, and I find it fascinating.
It's
so
funny. Yeah, that was a big part of my upbringing, the apartment association.
Really?
Yeah, my mom owned maid services, so she was on the vendor side of it.
Okay.
She was like for a while, like the president of the vendor side, at the chapter in Cincinnati. So yeah.
That is amazing.
I know. Like you don't know many people that know that association, but yeah, like
no. And
I went to the events. I learned all about trade shows there.
I love it. I learned that if you manage a large apartment complex, you're responsible for millions of dollars worth of property. And they really, at the time, they didn't pay them that well.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, what is happening? And so I learned about maintenance. We did classes for, people who maintain apartment complexes and that kind of thing. It was interesting.
Yeah.
And then I left.
Where I confirmed being a CPA, because my mom would take me with her to apartment association events. And when I was in high school, I started asking, well, what do you think I should major in? What do you think, to different property managers? And they're like, accounting. Over and over, they said accounting. They're like, if you knew accounting, you'll understand business.
Absolutely, because that business is, at least as I recall it, that time, I mean, the margins were not what you would, I think people think
anything in the middleman area is always going to be small margins, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So they were really, we were very focused on the numbers.
Yeah.
So, and then I left there and I went to a association management and lobbying firm.
Oh, okay.
So I was the association manager and I worked with a couple of people who were lobbyists, and I didn't do much of the I didn't lobby actually at the time. I just kind of communicated the legislative stuff that was going on. But at any rate, I was the executive director of 5 very tiny state associations. So back to my liking to learn things. I was the executive director of the Indiana Marriage and Family Therapy Association. the Indiana Cemetery and Funeral
This
Alliance.
is the one thing I've learned about. There is an association for everything, like every little like possible thing. Like that's been the most eye-opening thing being a speaker is like, really? There's an association for that.
Yes, Parks and Recreation, people who work for parks departments, athletic trainers.
Oh, okay.
Occupational therapists.
That's a lot of random occupations to learn about.
I know. It was great though.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed, that's why I always laugh.
So to stay healthy till death.
Yes. I learned about the rivalry between cemeteries and funeral parlors.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I loved learning about all those different things. It was challenging because I had worked for an association directly. And now I worked on a contract basis, right, for small associations that didn't have that much money. And so what was hard for me was I could see what they needed to do. But I was constantly kind of not getting in trouble, but like, hey, that's not in the contract, Jennifer. I just wanted to do things that I knew would help them. But yeah, so, and then from there, I met a staff member here at the society. Her name's Jill Doyle, and she was facilitating a study group for the CAE, which is the Certified Association Executive Credential. And I was in the study group, and she brought her boss, Gary Bollinger, who was the society CEO for 30 years, to a study group to talk to the group. And then he just called, and I think I argued with him. I think I know I did. I disagreed with something that he said. And he is the kind of person who was like, oh, I like that. Come work here.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was fun.
I just got a flashback to one of my first audit clients was a cemetery. Well, it was a funeral home, but the way they would classify it from an accounting perspective was pre-need or at need.
Yes.
Instead of like saying someone died, like, if, but it was just like, wait, what are we really talking about here? It's so interesting, like how different industries like classify their, prospects or
have their own terminology. And one association I forgot that I worked with was the community pharmacists. So these are people who owned pharmacies in small towns. Not CVS, not Walgreens, independent pharmacies, which we don't have as much anymore. And these guys, they were all guys, were so smart. I mean, they were entrepreneurs who were pharmacists.
Right.
Just so smart. I don't know why I thought, but you learn their language.
Right. Too, yeah. Where you get fascinated by just knowing what each industry does. So how do you think that's helped you working with CPAs, like learning all these different professions and moving around like you have, as far as leading an organization like this?
I think, a couple of things. Well, first of all, I think most associations, have the same basis, which is their mission. And so it kind of doesn't matter what you are representing. You are trying to make them better at what they do through education, through government relations and lobbying, through communicating with them about what's happening in the world and how it might affect them. So I just had a really strong basis in the fundamentals of an association. And I think that helps here. I think moving around a lot, though, also helped me realize that you kind of have to make your own change, if that makes sense, because this is going to sound bad, but this is what I say to people, like, 'cause my friend Jill, who introduced me to the Indiana CPA Society, had worked here for 12 years. And after I was here about a year, I said to her, if I ever work here 12 years, I will jump out the window.
So many people walk in. You are not the first person on this podcast to talk about working at a CPA society and feeling that way. It's so funny. And then people stay forever, right? Like then they start appreciating the customer.
Forever.
The member.
So
yeah.
What I realized was that every place you work is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to find the crazy that works best for you.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I am not calling CPAs crazy. I'm just saying I love what they do. I love how the variety, right? It's CPA
Mm-hmm.
is not a CPA, CPA. There's
Right.
they do everything. And so I get to learn still about what everyone does. And they're good people, they're just solid, nice people. But yeah, so then I stay and stay. But back to the change, I think part of why I stay is because my predecessor had a similar attitude to mine, which was that not nothing, but very few things are so sacred, if you will, or permanent that you can't change them.
Mm-hmm.
He was very, very good at being able to say, I know we've done this for 20 years, but it doesn't make sense anymore, and we're going to stop doing it. And
Right.
here's what we're going to do instead. And that was right. I mean, that's where I like to be, is where you break things and rebuild them.
Yeah.
So that helped a lot in my staying here, and that, well, I had a lot of different job titles, but I also knew that, there was always opportunity to try something new.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go back to something you said earlier about moving, which I think is probably helps you be successful as a leader, of that you were quiet in the beginning and listening.
Yeah.
How do you find yourself doing that?
Oh, so I think a big part of what we do in associations is try to explain things to people
Mm-hmm.
and communicate. And if you don't know where they are, you can't get them where they need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, it's practice, the listening that
Mm-hmm.
I'm always working on. But it helps a lot to hear, what are their pain points? What are their challenges? What are they seeing, so that you can meet them where they are to some extent, and then challenge them, based on knowing them. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Can you think of, with the year we've had, where you've had to put that into play?
Just all the drama at the beginning related to the profession at the beginning of the pandemic, with tax deadlines needing to change, and with CPAs needing to be considered an essential service, so they could continue to help their clients. And then the PPP and all that loan process was very busy, very, very, a lot to learn in a short period of time. And so my number one goal was to try to reach out to people, even though I knew they were busy. And I wanted to know what was happening from their perspective, so that we could, do the best we could. I was always concerned that we weren't doing enough. And so the only way to know is to ask. And so I did spend a lot of time just calling people in public accounting, calling people in industry, just trying to find out what was happening in their world. And so I learned things that maybe I wouldn't think about. For example, essential services. You think, well, CPAs work on computers, like, can't they work at home? Why do they need to be able to go to their office? But, a lot of smaller firms in smaller towns, they do payroll for businesses that are their clients, and they need to be on their secure systems. They can't just do it from, anywhere.
Right.
Stuff like that I don't think most people would think about, and you have to kind of talk to them to find out why that is. So,
well, and I think it's a good example, right, of and I always talk about this with my teams too, is sometimes there's these customers that represent 1%, but those are the ones you hear from. And so everyone goes off of what they say.
Yeah.
And like, well, they're saying this or they're saying, but who else have we asked?
Right.
Who have we reached out to that doesn't yell or doesn't speak
Yes.
the loudest or, or whatever. And then you learn these other things. And then you may learn, well, that issue really, we've talked to 10 other people and it's just an issue for them.
Oh my gosh, just this morning, this was a conversation that we had about an issue. And I'm like, well, can you talk to a few more people, and can we be sure this a long-term problem or a short-term problem,
right,
and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think the listening is very important. It's
so important. And I, and I do think it is a difference in leadership because, there's lots of research about how, people are afraid to speak up as leaders go higher and higher to speak up to them. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And if you're not a good listener, you can get so removed from where the business is or what's really happening without keeping your finger on the pulse of it and going out and doing your own listening tour, not just depending on everyone else because everybody's got an agenda. And it's like, but I need to be educated as well. Like rolling up your sleeves and willing to get dirty, right?
I mean, the day that I stop thinking I need to learn more is the day I, don't work here anymore, because that's the part that's the most interesting. I used to do these events called CPA conversations. And instead of an update, I would have information to update people on the profession, but our members on the profession, but I really wanted it to be a conversation.
Right.
And I mean, so much value was gained with those conversations. And you could even introduce people. Oh, I talked to you earlier and you have this problem and they have this solution. And that's been really hard during this virtual world because I don't know if it's our members or just people, humans in general, but it's more challenging to get that conversation between strangers in an online environment. So
it's not as personable.
Yeah, I miss that. I have to do a lot more individual outreach.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, that's awesome. So really good tips, I think, in here, and also just understanding like how the skills we develop when we're younger end up coming to fruition later. So, and all the transitions you might have stayed in Indiana, but made a lot of transitions in jobs, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So I like to end with a rapid fire segment where you pick a category.
Okay.
So family and friends, money, spiritual, or health.
Spiritual.
That one? Okay. So the question is, things or actions that I don't have that I want with my spirituality.
I would say a consistent practice of meditation. I don't, when I say spiritual, I guess I just mean how I feel as a person and what I do in the world. And I have noticed lately that it really does help taking a minute, breathing. I mean, I know with your yoga practice, and I have tried so hard over the years and go through times when I'm all about the yoga, but I find just the breathing and the meditation are incredibly helpful to me. I tend to be kind of and so I would like to do that more.
Awesome. Okay. Things or actions that I do have that I want.
I guess patience.
Mm-hmm.
Patience. Now, some people on our team here might disagree. I do feel like something that's come from working in one place for a long time is that you see like things
Yes.
come and go, and it's going to be fine, and we're going to
Yeah.
figure it out. So
Yes. Things or actions that I don't have that I don't want as far as my spirituality.
Well, I guess this is maybe pandemic related. The busyness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that right now. And I have had some serious conversations with some of my colleagues around the country about what are we going to keep from this? And
Yes.
I miss people so much, so much. However, having the ability to not just be go, 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 go,
Right.
go is helped me remember like myself and my family.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like, are you busy to be busy?
Right.
Like, what's really come down is what are the most important things to work on, because just working on things to work on them, like you really have to figure out now, like what time is intentional and
What meetings need to be in
yeah.
another city,
Yeah.
what meetings don't.
Yeah.
We've talked about that quite a bit, and I joke, and it's a joke, but I say, like, without going to breakfasts and lunches and awards dinners, my job does not take as much time as
Right.
it did before. So
Yeah. Awesome.
yeah.
So is there anything you want to make sure people leave this conversation with today that we haven't talked about?
Something that is important to me and is part of listening, I think, is being honest with yourself. I think owning your part in any situation is something that's a big part of how I work and how I lead and how I help people.
I love that.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story today. And it's been great. I'm sure there's lots of lessons people will be able to take away from it.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Now for our mindful moments. And our discussion with Jennifer led us to different countries and just the whole different perspective of what it's like to grow up with a father in the Army and the change that happens in your life. And I'd like to start with a word that Jennifer said, which was when she moved to Germany, that she thought it was magical. And I think that's such a great word to use with things that happen in our lives, that often we just go through the motions of making a change, but not open our eyes to the magic of a moment. And that word magical can then change how you approach something and go about it. And I think her experience of just experiencing the history of where she lived and taking excursions and meeting new kids was something that she really enjoyed. Even though she describes herself as shy, what she talked about was as she went into a new experience, that instead of talking, she would listen for a while and then slowly make friends. Now, I think this is a really good lesson in anything that we do, is when we start by listening, whether it's work relationships, family relationships, we start hearing what's important to other people, and we can incorporate that back to see what our commonalities are, where we can enjoy one another or help one another, instead of just going in and talking and not listening, which I think was a really good lesson to take through her life, especially in the work that she does to advocate for change, to help accounting firms change, to help corporations change. but the members of the association as well. When you listen as a skill, it can help as a leadership skill to make sure that you are addressing the pain points that people are having, not just assume what they are. So she took on many different roles in her career that eventually led her to the Indiana CPA Society. But I think all of those roles were really important in learning the work of associations, that she had some outside perspective before coming into a leadership role there and moving up through the ranks of there. But I think with anything we do, that outside perspective, whether you've been at the same company or firm your entire career, it's still important to network outside of the work that you do so that you can get perspective of a different culture, a different organization, how people think and so forth, because it's one of those things in life is we only know what we know, and we can think that is the whole environment when there's actually maybe 5 other things that we're unaware of that we can encounter without the experience of looking for what those things are. So really being open to your environment, not only in what you do, but outside of what you do, and seeking out those people that can help teach you those things is important. And that's that whole life of learning, that continuous learning that we need to put in place to make sure that we do succeed, whether that be in our personal lives or careers, that there's never a time that it is time to just rest and say that things will never change again, because that is the one truth in life, is that they will always change, whether that's personal or in our careers. Now, the other important thing that she talked about as she moved through her career is really being open to whatever jobs are available so that you learn different aspects of a business, that you don't pigeonhole yourself in one direction, so that you can have the experience that would be helpful and the perspective in whatever role you're in of other roles or other departments that might be something that would have been foreign to you if you hadn't had experience working in that. And being able to bring in all those different perspectives in the job that you do actually helps with your success. So one of the things she talked about was, as she was moving up into senior levels, that there was a director that she worked for that says to her, "You can do my job," and told her to tell management that she wanted the job and that she wanted to give it a try, which was a great lesson in both ways, right? As a mentor or a leader, we should always be looking for who could do the job that we do and make sure we're grooming them and helping them to get there, because we always want someone ready to take our jobs so that we can do other jobs and be able to grow in our careers. So we never want to block people from learning and growing. And then the second part of it was, it wasn't like this director just went and advocated for her on her own. What she did was say, you need to go advocate for yourself as well. And the thing about it is, when you take that leap and tell people that you want more responsibility, that you're looking for that, they're going to give you the feedback that they need. Maybe not that you want, but that you need, that will tell you what experience that you need to have. Or they're going to think in their heads, you know what, I wouldn't have thought of you for that role, but you do have the experience. I like your work ethic, which is the most important thing, is that you're working hard, and then take that person under their wing into that role. So it doesn't mean we have to be ready for every role that comes available. What it does mean is we have to speak up that we're looking for it, be open to learning, which is that continuous learning. So not feel like we have to be perfect in everything that we do, that we're open to learning it. And that we ask for what we want in life so that we can get the path there. Because maybe you're not ready, but by asking, you're going to understand the path to get there so that you can start preparing for it as well. She also talked about just her transition in the accounting profession and understanding the psyche of a different profession and how to work. And one of the things that was an overriding skill that she found in her own life that she was brought up with, but also in association work that was so important, is to explain and communicate. And explaining and communicating is a really important thing that if you don't know where you are, you can't help, right? So if you're not asking the questions, there's no way for you to help somebody else be able to achieve what they want. But understanding their pain points can help you make sure that you are fulfilling the needs of the people that you're working with or the customers that you're working with. So rather than assuming what somebody needs or just listening to the loudest voice or complaint, sometimes that might be an anomaly and most people are fine. And there's another issue that's under the covers that people aren't speaking up. So I think that was, a really big thing with her was being open to the conversations that you need to have, connecting with people, networking, looking for where you can get resources, and then being really honest with yourself that you own your part in any situation that you're in and how you go reach for the vision and the goals that you have. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.